The moment Clara McKenna pulled the wounded soldier into the shadows, everything changed. Out on the Port Vale Airbase tarmac, alarms howled and boots hammered as military police swept past, ignoring her, ignoring him. But Clara couldn't ignore the blood or the panic in his eyes. She pressed a bandage to his side, whispering, "You're safe just for a second." In his rush to escape, the soldier dropped a battered USB drive at her feet. She picked it up, just as base sirens flared red. "Security breach! All personnel! Lockdown!" And suddenly, Clara stood alone, her hands stained with a stranger's fear, holding a secret she didn't understand. Would you have helped, knowing it might cost you everything? Sometimes the world changes in an instant, just because one person refuses to look away. What would you have done? For most of her life, Clara McKenna had grown used to the comfort of invisibility. At 31, she was the kind of woman who never quite fit into the sharp angles and loud laughter of the Port Vale Airbase. She was neither uniformed nor saluted, just a civilian technician with quiet hands and old habits, slipping between the cracks of a world built on hierarchy and noise. Her days at the base blurred together, arriving before dawn to the hush of empty corridors, running her checks on the labyrinth of control systems, tapping in passwords, checking circuits, monitoring the lifelines of a place that barely remembered her name. Most mornings, the other staff didn't look up when she passed. A nod, a mutter, sometimes a grunt of thanks if she fixed the backup power before anyone noticed the lights flickered. She carried her own mug, poured her own coffee, and ate lunch on a bench overlooking the snow-capped Rockies, dreaming about a life beyond base security fences. Everyone assumed she had no story. But Clara's life was shaped by silence and by loss. Her father, Tom McKenna, was once a legend in these parts, a military engineer whose laugh could fill a room and whose hands could coax miracles from battered machines. Her father had vanished in a military accident when she was 17. Official reports offered no comfort, only questions. Even now, as Clara walked the echoing hallways of Port Vale, she sometimes caught herself wishing he could see her, fighting in her own quiet way, for the kind of truth he'd believed in. Tonight, after the chaos at the hangar, she trudged home under a sky striated with searchlights, pockets weighted with keys, a flashlight, and, she realized only when she fumbled for her phone, the battered USB drive from the wounded soldier. She held it up to the lamp in her living room, tilting it back and forth in the pale light. There was nothing special about it, just a smudge of blood on the plastic, a military barcode, and a deep scratch across one side. If she'd been anyone else, maybe she'd have tossed it into a drawer, forgotten, but curiosity was Clara's inheritance, the last gift from a father who never stopped asking why. She booted up her battered old laptop, hands trembling only a little, and slotted the USB into the port. Instantly, the screen blinked, a jolt of static, a black window, and then, in stark white letters, "Stop now. You are being watched." Her breath caught. She snapped the laptop shut, heart pounding in her ears. The apartment felt suddenly too small, the windows too bright against the night. Was it a prank? Some military spyware? Or had she just stepped across an invisible line? In the silence, an old memory rose. Her father's voice, gruff and gentle from the years before loss. "Clara, the world's going to try to make you smaller?" Outside, the distant thrum of helicopter blades echoed across the town, searchlights slicing through the clouds. Somewhere, military dogs barked, and Clara realized she was gripping the USB so tightly her knuckles ached. The ordinary world had faded. She could feel it. A storm of secrets swirling just out of sight, closing in with every beat of the night. The next morning, Clara barely slept. Each sound outside her apartment, every truck rolling by, every siren echo, felt like a threat. She had no idea what to do with the USB drive, so she stashed it in a book, hoping that ignorance might still protect her. But the illusion of safety shattered before her first coffee was cold. At 8:03, two men in base security uniforms appeared at her door. Their expressions gave nothing away. She could almost pretend it was just a routine compliance check. But their clipped voices, the way they blocked the exit, made her stomach tighten. "Ms. McKenna, you're needed for a few questions about last night's incident." The base security office felt colder than the hangar. Behind a desk, Major Perry, head of internal security, studied her with a look that was more clinical than hostile. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, grainy camera stills from the hangar, blurry but damning. Clara's outline, the wounded soldier's face half turned toward her hand clutching something in the darkness. "We have you on camera aiding an unauthorized person, Ms. McKenna. Did you know you were interfering in an active security operation?" "I saw someone in trouble," Clara said softly. "I just wanted to help." Perry's eyes narrowed. "That's what concerns us. Either you're extremely naive, or you're involved." She shook her head, but the silence between them grew oppressive. He tapped the folder. "Anything you'd like to declare? Anything you found or received during the incident?" Her throat tightened. The USB in her jacket suddenly felt like a live grenade. No, nothing." He stared a beat too long. "We'll be in touch. Do not leave the base perimeter." As she left the office, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Turn in the device or disappear. No one will remember you." Clara's hands shook. She walked quickly, head down, fighting panic. Had she already gone too far? Was there any way back? But as the day dragged on, questions multiplied. She saw groups of MPs posted in corners of the cafeteria, heard rumors of a traitor on base. People she'd known for years avoided her gaze. An icy paranoia settled in. Could everyone see what she'd done? That night, she tried to sleep, but dreams of her father's voice and the soldiers' terrified eyes haunted her. Around midnight, she finally snapped. She needed answers, needed the truth, even if it hurt. She retrieved the USB and booted up her laptop. This time, bypassing the initial warning, she dug deeper. Files appeared, encrypted, but labeled with strange codes. One video loaded, a hidden camera view of an officer's office, senior staff, unfamiliar voices discussing contracts and deliveries. At the end, a glimpse of a familiar face. Major Perry. A knock shattered her focus. Clara froze, heart hammering. "Clara, open up! It's Lucas!" She hesitated. Through the peephole, she saw the young soldier, his face bruised, eyes bloodshot but alive. She unlocked the door, and he slipped inside, clutching his ribs. "They know you have it, don't they?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, and for the first time saw fear in his face, not for himself, but for her. "I'm not just a grunt. I'm Army CID, investigating corruption on this base. Someone's been feeding our secrets to the wrong side, and I got too close. That USB, it's everything. They'll do anything to destroy it, and anyone holding it." Clara's world reeled. "You want me to help you?" Lucas nodded. "I can't do it alone. And you're already in it, whether you like it or not." Trust was a luxury she didn't have, but she saw no choice. "What do we do?" Lucas outlined a plan. They needed to reach the comms building, upload the files to a trusted contact outside. "We'll have one shot before they shut us down," he said. "Can you get us in?" Clara nodded, pulse pounding. "I know every back door on this base." Together they slipped out into the night, past the barracks, through a side door, ducking under security cameras Clara had repaired herself. She felt eyes everywhere, the thrill and terror of breaking every rule she'd ever followed. They reached the checkpoint by the comms tower. A drone whirred overhead, searchlight slicing the dark. Lucas pressed her against the wall, holding his breath as MPs passed by. For a moment, his hand lingered on hers. Steady, warm, a rare point of trust. Inside the tower, they navigated server racks and humming machinery. Clara worked quickly, nerves like live wires. Lucas keeping watch at the door. "Why trust me?" she whispered. He smiled, a shadow of his old self. "Because you helped a stranger when no one else would. I'm betting you'll help save a lot more than that." She found the data port, inserted the USB, and began decrypting files. But then, alarms. Security doors slammed shut. On the screens, Perry's face, cold and furious. "Security breach detected. Surrender immediately." Lucas drew a pistol, eyes wild. "They're here. We have to move." Clara grabbed the drive and bolted after him. The stairwell echoed with shouts and running boots. At the exit, Lucas shoved her ahead, taking a blow to the shoulder as MPs swarmed. Clara burst into the darkness, the USB clutched to her chest, running for her life. She reached a warehouse, heart hammering, doors banging behind her. Trapped, she heard Lucas's voice, then a gunshot. Lucas staggered in, blood staining his sleeve. "Go, they're right behind me, don't let them get it!" As MPs closed in, Clara knelt beside Lucas, eyes burning with tears. For one desperate second, she almost handed over the drive, almost gave in to fear. But instead, she fumbled her phone, sending a last-ditch encrypted message to a military journalist she barely knew. Her final hope. As she hit send, shouts erupted outside the storeroom door, a rush of boots and harsh orders. Clara stuffed the phone back in her pocket, grabbed the slick USB, and hauled Lucas upright. Together, they darted through a narrow side exit, just as the MPs stormed in behind. The night air hit them like a slap. Clara and Lucas fled into the maze of supply warehouses, their footsteps echoing across the concrete as they dodged beams of flashlight cutting through the dark. Lucas stumbled, blood dripping through his fingers. Clara half-dragged him, both breathless with fear and resolve. The warehouse felt cavernous in the darkness. Every breath echoed. Clara ducked behind a pallet of boxed rations, the USB slick in her sweaty hand, her phone still vibrating with a string of anonymous threats. She could hear the MPs fanning out, shouting orders, boots crunching on concrete, flashlights cutting ribbons through the dust. Somewhere behind her, Lucas's ragged breathing grew fainter. He pressed a bloodied hand to his chest and tried to smile, but the pain twisted his features. "Clara, you have to finish it, no matter what." Her mind spun with questions. Could she really trust him? Was Lucas who he claimed to be, or just another pawn in this brutal game? If she failed, would anyone ever learn the truth? Or would she vanish, nameless, erased, just as the messages promised? Footsteps closed in. She pressed herself flatter, willing her heartbeat silent. Just as a beam of light swept her way, Clara's phone vibrated again. This time, it was different. A coded ping. The journalist on the outside had received her message. "If you can get the files out, I can get them to the right people. Don't let them take you. Kay. A surge of hope flared. She couldn't give up now. Suddenly, a deafening crash. Lucas, lashing out in a last act of defiance, knocked over a shelf of heavy crates. The MPs scattered, momentarily disoriented. "Run!" he gasped. Clara bolted. She raced through the maze of shelving, heart thudding. One MP lunged for her. She dodged, nearly slipping on spilled rations, barely holding onto the drive. She darted out a side door into the icy air, her lungs burning. Somewhere in the distance, she heard sirens. Base-wide lockdown. Every gate, every checkpoint would be sealed in seconds. She needed a plan. Fast. She found herself in the shadows behind the airfield fuel depot, crouching behind a battered utility vehicle. Clara's hands trembled. Each keystroke felt like a heartbeat racing against time. The world shrank to the pale screen, the pounding in her chest, and the hope that someone, anyone, might hear her call. The upload bar crawled forward, painfully slow. Lights swept the depot. MPs were coming. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. File received. Get safe if you can. The truth will out. Miles away, in a dark apartment lit only by a laptop's glow, the journalist known to Clara only as Kay worked through the night. The moment the files landed, Kay went to ground, changing phones, wiping drives, dodging questions from strangers and threats from the powerful. When news finally broke, Kay's name never appeared. But without that silent ally, the truth might never have seen daylight. A strange, ragged laugh escaped Clara's throat. All she had left was a sliver of faith and a battered USB. She crouched lower as voices drew closer. One last choice. Surrender quietly, as the MPs demanded. Or try to make it to the main radio mast and broadcast the evidence herself, ensuring backup if the outside help failed. As she hesitated, Lucas's weak voice crackled through her comm's earpiece. He'd somehow snagged a radio from an MP. "Clara, whatever happens, thank you. You did more than anyone else ever dared." There was no time for goodbyes. Clara sprinted for the mast, ignoring the shouts behind her. The cold bit into her lungs. Alarms blurred with the wind. She reached the radio relay, jammed the USB into the emergency terminal, and hit transmit. Behind her, the MPs finally closed in, guns drawn, voices harsh. She held up empty hands, out of breath, unafraid now. She'd done all she could. As they cuffed her and led her away, Clara looked back at the empty airfield, the faint glow of dawn on the horizon, and wondered what the world would look like if anyone ever knew what really happened here. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear, no matter who wants you to. The hours that followed blurred into interrogation rooms, clipped questions, and sleepless waiting. Rumors of the data breach swept across the base, the tension thickening with each passing hour. At last, Clara was quietly released. No apology, just an order to stay silent. "We want things calm for the ceremony," an officer muttered. The hours that followed blurred together. Harsh lights, curt questions, long silences. Yet as the sun rose, the mood in the base changed. Rumors of leaked files began to swirl through the corridors. Security guards who once stared her down now glanced away, uneasy. Somewhere beyond those walls, the evidence had taken on a life of its own. Fragments surfacing online, anonymous messages sparking fresh investigations. In that shifting uncertainty, leadership quietly ordered Clara's release, not out of mercy, but because they couldn't contain the story any longer. That morning, drained but free, Clara melted into the crowds gathering for the annual honor ceremony. her mind still reeling from what she had risked. There are moments when a life turns on a single decision, a refusal to step back, a stubborn heartbeat of courage. For Clara McKenna, that moment arrived just before dawn on the day of Port Vale's annual honor ceremony. The base, already humming with tension, now thrummed with a forced cheer. Banners hung in the wind, medals were polished, the air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and somewhere beneath it all, fear. Hundreds gathered, soldiers in crisp dress blues, officers with ribbons blazing, a few civilian families, and a scattering of media. It was the perfect stage, Clara realized, for men who lived behind masks, traitors and patriots alike, to make their final moves. Clara had never been the kind of person to stand at the center of a crowd. Today, she blended in, donning a white catering jacket, a borrowed cap tugged low. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady. Under one arm, hidden in a tray of hors d'oeuvres, was the battered USB drive, its secrets pulsing like a second heart. She moved quietly through the shadows, gliding between folding chairs, trays of finger food, and tables set for celebration. All around her, laughter and speeches blurred into a low static. Somehow, in the chaos after the breach, Lucas slipped away from the medics. Maybe it was luck, or maybe a sympathetic nurse, one who remembered her own brother, turned a blind eye as he limped out. Determination, Clara thought later, could do more than morphine. In a far corner, Lucas Harlow limped in, blending into the crowd, face pale but determined. He'd escaped his confinement, dragging a wounded leg and a will that wouldn't die. They met eyes once. Just a flicker. Enough. Up front, the ceremony's MC, Mr. Leonard, took the stage. Most thought of him as just a minor official, a bystander in the world of military drama. But Clara remembered a time, years ago, when her father had called Leonard the only honest man left at Port Vale. "Ladies and gentlemen," Leonard announced, "today we honor those who serve, who keep our skies safe, who remind us what duty means." As applause thundered, Clara slipped behind the AV console at the edge of the stage. Her palms were slick with sweat. She plugged the USB into the master terminal, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure it would give her away. A whisper crackled in her earpiece. Lucas's voice, strained and urgent. "Now, Clara, it's all or nothing." Clara hit play. The room changed in an instant. The screen behind the stage flickered, then bloomed with raw, unvarnished truth. Surveillance clips, spreadsheets, audio logs, names and faces of senior officers flashing by in brutal sequence. Secret meetings in the dead of night. Whispered exchanges about deliveries and payments. And finally, Major Perry, cold and certain, laying out the price of betrayal. The audience froze. Even the wind seemed to stop. For a breathless eternity, nobody moved. Then chaos exploded. Shouts ricocheted off the walls. A cluster of officers at the front lunged for the AV desk, faces twisted in fury. "Turn it off! Cut the feed!" one of them bellowed. But Clara stood her ground, voice ringing out. "You don't need a rank to defend the honor of your country." A shot rang out. A weapon drawn not in defense but in desperate cover-up. Lucas, battered and bleeding, stepped between Clara and the muzzle, his body taking the brunt of the blow meant for her. He crumpled, gasping, but met her eyes. "Finish it, Clara. Don't let them win." The crowd surged forward, torn between confusion and fear. It was Mr. Leonard, the mere MC, who moved fastest. Dropping his microphone, he leapt onto the stage and shielded Clara with his own body. "Stay down," he barked, as loyal MPs, finally seeing the evidence blazing on the screen, turned on the traitors with steel in their eyes. For a handful of seconds, everything blurred. Yelling, the clatter of chairs, the scuffle of boots and handcuffs. Major Perry and his inner circle tried to fight, but the tide had turned. The honest men and women of Port Vale refused to let the truth die. Perry's wrists were wrenched behind his back, his sneer crumbling as he was led away. On the screen, the evidence looped, unignorable, damning, permanent. As the final traitor was dragged from the hall, silence fell, so heavy it hurt. Clara stood trembling, center stage, Lucas wounded beside her, Leonard standing guard. The faces of hundreds stared back, some with awe, some with fear, some with shame for not seeing what had been there all along. No one spoke. No one quite knew what to do. The silence broke in waves, a murmur here, a gasp there. One young officer rose from his seat, eyes shining with new respect. Another followed. Soon, a ripple of voices swelled as soldiers and civilians alike turned to face Clara, the first few raising their hands in salute. Spontaneous, unprompted. The spell of complicity was broken. For a moment, Clara felt exposed, stripped bare by light and truth. Had she done the right thing? Had she destroyed herself for nothing? Or would anyone remember the risk she'd taken? The sun crested the windows, gold flooding the room. In that glow, the line between fear and hope shimmered, uncertain. And there, on that stage, in that silent storm, Clara waited, her fate hanging by a thread, the world holding its breath. For a long, suspended moment, the great hall of Port Vale Airbase seemed frozen in amber, hundreds of eyes fixed on Clara, on the wounded Lucas at her side, on the damning evidence that looped in digital silence behind them. No one applauded. No one spoke. Even the air itself felt reluctant to move. Finally, a whisper started somewhere in the crowd, a tremor of realization. Soldiers, officers, and civilians looked to one another, some faces etched with relief, others with the bruised color of shame. The spell of complicity was broken. The truth could not be unseen. Medical teams swept in, kneeling beside Lucas. He was still conscious, blood oozing from his side, but he managed a crooked smile at Clara. "You did it," he rasped, the words threaded with pride and pain. As medics carried him off, Clara tried to follow, but a pair of MPs stopped her. This time not with suspicion, but with a strange, quiet respect. "You need to be debriefed, ma'am," one said gently, guiding her away from the chaos. Outside, the air was sharp, filled with the clatter of choppers and urgent radio chatter. Within hours, news spread across every building on the base. The ring of traitors had fallen. Names were whispered, then shouted, then posted on doors. Those who had looked the other way now averted their eyes for different reasons. Commanders who had doubted Clara sent for her, suddenly aware of what her courage had cost. But the real aftermath was quieter. In the windowless rooms where Clara was questioned, faces changed, first stern and skeptical, then softening as the story came out. At first, the investigators seemed to search for something to blame her for, a missed procedure, a technical breach. But at every turn, the evidence she delivered protected her. The base command couldn't find a regulation to cover what had just happened, so they fell back on the old habit. Silence. No medals. No public thanks. Not even an official apology. Clara returned to her small apartment, exhaustion flooding her body. She watched the sunlight crawl across her ceiling, wondering if her father would have understood the strange shape of heroism in this age. For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. Major Perry and his circle faced swift justice, court-martialed, stripped of rank, and removed from Port Vale. Their names, once feared, became warnings whispered to every new recruit. Outside the gates of Port Vale, nothing stayed secret for long. Journalists camped on the perimeter. Public outrage simmered. Protests, petitions, voices demanding answers. For months, the scandal echoed far beyond the base, a warning to others that no system, however strong, could silence the truth forever. In the days that followed, the mood on base shifted. Co-workers who had once dismissed Clara began to meet her eyes in the corridor. Some nodded in silent respect. A few even muttered a gruff, "Thank you." One afternoon, as she finished calibrating the backup power grid, a young technician slipped her a homemade pin, a piece of scrap metal stamped with the words, "Invisible, Unbreakable." She laughed, really laughed, for the first time since all this began. Later that week, as the command held a private briefing for surviving staff, Clara saw Mr. Leonard again. The MC from the ceremony approached her in the hallway, hat in hand. "You did something most of us never dared, Ms. McKenna," he said quietly. "And you did it for people who didn't even know they needed saving." Clara's voice was soft, but sure. "No one else would have believed me if Lucas hadn't stood with me. We're not supposed to do this alone." Leonard smiled, eyes shining. "Perhaps that's the lesson we'll all remember." That evening, as dusk bled into night, Clara stood by the base's main gate, breathing in the cold, clean air. She remembered her father's words again, felt them settle on her shoulders. Not as a burden, but as a strange, proud warmth. Sometimes the bravest victories are the quietest. Weeks passed, and the world spun on. Port Vale, once a fortress of secrets, slowly thawed under new leadership. The faces that had ruled by fear were gone. Soldiers and staff began to move with something like hope. There were rumors that what happened at the honor ceremony had been reported to higher command, but in official memos, Clara's name was little more than a footnote. Yet on the edges of the base, her story grew roots. New recruits whispered about her in the barracks at night. The civilian tech who exposed a ring of traitors. The woman who stood her ground when even generals faltered. Some said she'd been lucky. Others called her reckless. But most, quietly, called her brave. Clara herself retreated into old rhythms. She walked the snowy perimeter before dawn, coffee mug steaming in her gloved hands, headphones filling her ears with static. Sometimes, as the sun rose over the Rockies, she would close her eyes and remember the moment when Lucas Harlow, alive and slowly healing, took her hand in the hospital ward and said, "You did for me what no one else ever dared. For all of us." One day, a new commander arrived. The base gathered for a short ceremony in the wide, echoing hall. This time, the medals were modest, the speeches short. Clara sat at the back, unnoticed, content to blend in. But as the new pilots lined up to take their oaths, something changed. The commander paused. Then, with a gentle nod to the MC, he gestured to Clara. "Before we close," the MC announced, voice steady, "it's time to recognize someone whose courage reminds us what service really means." The hall fell silent. Hundreds of uniforms turned. The young pilots, the future of the base, stood as one and raised their hands in salute. For a breathless moment, it was not for rank or protocol, but for a single act of quiet defiance. Clara felt her cheeks burn. She nodded back, eyes shining with tears she refused to hide. In that hush, her father's words echoed once more. Sometimes doing the right thing is its own reward. The MC closed the ceremony softly. "Let us all remember, It often takes just one act of kindness, one moment of courage, to wake the heart of an entire institution. Months later, as new recruits gathered in the training hall, Clara was quietly invited to share her story. She spoke not of glory, but of doubt and quiet courage. Sometimes, she told them, the bravest thing isn't fighting, but refusing to let the truth be buried. The scars she carried weren't always visible, but they reminded her that courage often comes after the fear. As the crowd spilled into the frosty evening, Clara stepped outside, her breath a silver thread in the twilight. She felt lighter, not invisible, but truly seen at last. Sometimes the world changes because someone refuses to look away. Sometimes the smallest kindness becomes a storm that clears the air for everyone. If you've ever stood alone for what's right, or longed for a sign that your actions matter, let Clara's story be your answer. Maybe your name will never fill the headlines. Maybe the world will never know what you chose to stand for. But somewhere, someone will be changed because you refused to turn away. If you've ever doubted that your courage matters, let Clara's story remind you. Even the quietest act can echo far. And if this story stays with you, share it, or simply remember. Sometimes, what really happened isn't just history. It's hope.